Mrs. Youngston was married to this violent, drunken brute of a man, and it was like the umpteenth time that Mrs. Youngston came to her priest to tell him, I'm so scared. Joe says he's going to kill me if I continue to come to your church. And the priest says, yes, my child, I will continue to pray for you. And sorry, this is the worst Irish accent you've ever heard. I'm sorry, brother. I'll continue to pray for you and Mrs. Youngston. As I've said, just have faith and the Lord will watch over you. And she's like, yes, he has kept me safe thus far. It's just what, my child? Well, now he says, if I keep coming to your church, he's going to kill you. And the priest says, well, you might want to try the church across town. I wonder how many of us have all kinds of faith in words, in theory, in our theology, until we're asked to really step out in belief. And maybe a time when you thought God was asking you to do something that was off the charts ridiculous, or to believe something that felt just off the charts crazy, or maybe a real honest to goodness Indiana Jones, step off the cliff moment, trusting in God that the path is there, or to trust in him for something that just seemed certifiable for you to trust in him for, or he was calling you to do something that made no sense. So much so that you could only laugh at the thought of it. And did you ever think that maybe God was in on the joke? That he knew he was setting you up to have ridiculous levels of faith and trust in him. And maybe, just maybe, he's kind of having fun doing it. Not at your expense, but knowing the story in time might even make you smile at the audacity of it all. Like, Noah, I want you to build a big boat, and just for fun, it's going to be essentially in the desert, and I'll tell you what goes inside it later. Or maybe you're familiar with the story of Joshua in the Bible when he came to Jericho to take that city in a military campaign. And Joshua says to God, what's the plan? A sneak attack, a forward assault, a perimeter siege? And God's like, nah, I was thinking a parade. A lot of noise, trumpets, flags every day for 7 days. Let's see how walking laps works. I mean, the God of upended expectations, upside down kingdom values, he's got to find some of this humorous. And there seems to be this pattern. God calls people to do something, but in answering the call, they have to demonstrate just sick levels of faith and trust and embrace what might even look to the world to be a bit comical. And sometimes they actually just LOL'd. And they laughed in disbelief, a laugh that said, there's no way. I mean, God, I love you and I want to follow you, but there's no way this could be the plan. We're in a series called When God Makes Us Laugh. And last week we looked at the humor of Jesus, kind of a walkthrough of the times he used humor to make a point. And today, let's dig into the laugh of disbelief. And to do that, let's look at a man named Abram and his wife Sarai. And let me read the story of their life and their calling in Genesis. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot, her brother, went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all of his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. Now, if you're new to the unfolding story of the Bible, this is a pivotal section to take note of, because the calling of Abram and the promise of a son and descendants is actually the beginning of the Jewish people as a called out group who would be like a bridge to bring the world back to God. And so from Abram would come Isaac, and then Jacob, and then the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the exodus of God's people out of Egypt under Moses, the entering into the promised land. All of this is leading to the coming of the Messiah from the Jewish people who would save the world, and that, of course, is Jesus. And sort of tracing an ocean up a river to a stream to a creek to a small spring, you can trace God's redemptive work after we screwed up in Eden back to this moment, this calling of Abram. Jesus can be traced back to Abram. But notice something important. God waited to call Abram to his task of starting a nation when he was, wait for it, 75 years old and childless. Seeing if Grant is here this morning. Is Grant here? Yeah, I just wonder how he would feel about that, for instance. And not because he and Sarai hadn't already tried to have children. So already we see that God's way is almost hilariously counterintuitive, almost picking the most unlikely people in the most unlikely scenarios, maybe as a way of making a point. Like where the only possible explanation for this being, well, that's got to be a God thing, right? Now, like most of us, when it comes to God and prayer and asking him things and needing things, we have one and only one timetable. Now, today. And we have little or no place for waiting, even waiting for things to take weeks or months. Now, for Abram and Sarai, we're not talking weeks or months, but years, decades, generations. And as strong as he has started out, he started to lose faith. And it's hard not to have empathy for him. But that's when God spoke to him again, this time in a vision. Here's what it says. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son, since you've given me no children? Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. So Abram keeps waiting. Now the Bible keeps things pretty real. And this story is no exception. So some time went on after that vision, and Abram begins to wonder whether this is all real and whether God's going to do this thing that he promised, or whether maybe there was a plan B that he should pursue. Abram ran out of patience. Sarai ran out of patience. By now, Abram was no longer 75. He was 85. Right at that classic childbearing season for all of us, right? And so they came up with their own plan B. Oh my goodness, how many times do we come up with our own plan B to help God along? Here's what their plan B was. Remember, not everything recorded in the Bible is endorsed in the Bible. In fact, a lot of time, most times, there isn't even commentary like, this was a sinful, dumb decision. But spoiler alert, what they're about to do is a sinful, dumb decision. Let me read from it. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. She had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai says to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. The Lord has prevented. Okay. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. Somebody used to say ooh. It is ooh. Yeah, it's a ooh. Perhaps I can have, maybe it's a baby. Anyways, ADD. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. In that ancient culture, there, was little knowledge of what we would call gynecology, or about genetics, X and Y chromosomes, or the fertilizing of the female egg. So when it came to children, what was believed was that the man was everything, like so much else at that time. It was all about the man. So there was not that same understanding that a different woman other than your wife would have any bearing on the child. So if a wife couldn't bear children, it wasn't unheard of for the husband to bear children through a servant or a concubine of some kind. In fact, in that day, it was often the wife's responsibility to make sure that there was a surrogate childbearer if needed. But for Abram and Sarai, it was bigger than that. God told them he was going to give them a child through Sarai. He told them that his call on their life was to create an entire nation through them, Abram and Sarai. But here Sarai said that it was kind of God who made her barren, kind of inferring that God has reneged on his promise. So she would have to take matters into her own hands to make sure that Abram had a child. And Abram went along with it. And maybe some of y'all like, yeah, I'll bet he did. I'll bet he did. And it worked. Hagar got pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named Ishmael when Abram was 86 years old. Now, fast forward to the next scene, 13 years later. Somebody quick who's good with math. How old is Abram now? 99. Dr. Bill McRae just turned 91, one of the great preachers of our generation. Can you imagine, Bill, if your primary calling in ministry didn't start until 8 more years later? This is where Abram is at. God shows up again to remind Abram of his promise. Let me read it. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Serve me faithfully and live a blameless life. I will make a covenant with you by which I will guarantee to you, give you countless descendants. At this, Abram fell face down on the ground. Then God said to him, this is my covenant with you. I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. What's more, I am changing your name. It will no longer be Abram. Instead, you will be called Abraham, for you will be the father of many nations. I will make you extremely fruitful. Your descendants will become many nations. Now stop there for a sec. Abram, now Abraham, which means father of many, is 99. And this is the third time God has come to him, starting back when he was 75, to say, we're in a covenant together. I made you a promise. This is happening. And yeah, they tried to usurp God, to get ahead of God, to assist God. But the time had finally come for the big reveal from God. And here it is. Genesis. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. Now, here we get to see Sarai change her name, Sarai with an I to Sarah with an H. It's unclear what the old spelling meant, but the new spelling meant princess. It indicates how she would share in Abraham's calling and that kings would descend from her. And this is important. It made it clear that the entire covenant would be jointly fulfilled through her, that she was going to have a son at 90 years of age. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but to say that maybe it was past childbearing years, well, guess what, smarty pants? You will get pregnant, you will have a child, and that child would be the fulfillment of the calling that God put before Abraham. Now, finally, we get to our word study on laughter. And look at what this promise made the post-Viagra Abraham do in light of his post-menopausal wife. Then Abraham bowed down to the ground, but he laughed to himself in disbelief. How could I become a father at the age of 100, he thought? And how can Sarah have a baby when she is 90 years old? So Abraham said to God, may Ishmael live under your special blessing. But God replied, no, Sarah, your wife, will give birth to a son for you. You will name him Isaac, and I will confirm my covenant with him and his descendants as an everlasting covenant. My covenant will be confirmed with Isaac, who will be born to you, and Sarah about this time next year. When God had finished speaking, he left Abraham. Now, I think it's important to say, Abraham didn't laugh at God, like mocking him. He laughed with God about what God was saying. He was laughing at the very idea of it all, the absurdity of it all. Have you ever done that? If you haven't, if you keep walking with the Lord, you will. God seems to place his people in these, you gotta be kidding me situations, almost with I think, kind of a twinkle in his eye. When Moses went up to the sea, don't you think he had to be going, this is crazy. I got a staff and maybe just smiled at the absurdity of it all. When scrawny David picked up a rock for his slingshot, of all things, against 9-foot Goliath, who had conquered the best of the best, maybe he had a smile at the nuttiness of it all. I got a rock and a slingshot, and I'm a teenager. And was God upset at the laugh of Abraham? I don't think so. Maybe he'd been waiting for it. In fact, you want to know something? Remember how God told Abraham to name this upcoming son, Isaac. Do you know what the name Isaac means? He laughs. He laughs. But the fun wasn't over. We haven't gotten to where Sarah hears about this. Let me read that. Sarah was listening at the tent opening. Abraham and Sarah were old by this time, very old. Sarah was far past the age for having babies. Sarah laughed within herself. An old woman like me get pregnant with this old man of a husband? It's from the Message translation. God said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, me have a baby? An old woman like me? Is anything too hard for God? I'll be back about this time next year, and Sarah will have a baby. Sarah lied. She said, I didn't laugh. Like she's in school, because she was afraid. But he said, yes, you did. You laughed. It cracks me up, this story. Sarah's eavesdropping on this whole thing, and she laughs, maybe one of those laughs that you just you kind of can't stifle, like, one of those. But she gets caught and gets a little, gentle admonition from God that he can certainly pull off anything he wants, and says, I'll see you in 9 months and we'll see who's laughing then. And this is what I find funny. Sarah going, I didn't laugh. God said, yeah, you did. You did. God's just having fun with it. Well, there's one last laugh in this story, and I want to read it to you. It's a sweet one. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. At the very time God had promised him, Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. I love that story. Abraham and Sarah learned how to laugh with God. First at the outrageous promises and claims and activities and miracles. A laugh of wide-eyed, head-shaking, mouth-open disbelief, or at least at the faith it's going to take to believe it. And I think it's a wonderful laugh, a faith-building laugh, and a healthy laugh, because it's not the laugh of mockery, but it's the laugh of the crazy adventure of it all. The laugh of a whitewater rafting trip, the laugh of a bungee jump, the laugh of the Leviathan coaster at Canada's Wonderland. You know, the laugh that comes when you do something you can hardly believe anyone in their right mind would do. But God in his right mind is calling you to do it, to believe it, to live it. And you never felt more alive. God speaks to many of you in this church. He speaks in different ways. He speaks to my friend Norm Coster. Norm got a picture last week, and that's how God often speaks to him in pictures and visions. Last week at our open mic, different folks were coming up and sharing their life circumstances. Times it was in the valley, and then God would surprise them with his generosity and with the riches of his mercy. And Norm got a picture, a vision of us on a roller coaster. You know, these high highs and these low lows and extremes. And we all react differently, don't we? Some people scream. But you'll notice a lot of folks actually, what are they like? Got their hands up and a yippee, and you can't wipe the smile off their face. That is like, because in the highlands or the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. So I will praise you in the mountain, or I will praise you in the mountains in the way, and I will praise you in the valleys all the same. Have you laughed like that lately? You say, well, God hasn't exactly paid me any visits, laying any big faith steps on me to believe or to obey. Hasn't he? Like, if you were to think about it, isn't there maybe something you've read in the Bible recently or heard during one of these services or felt impressed upon in your spirit by God to do something that was faith challenging? Maybe to give an irrationally generous gift, maybe to serve selflessly where there really is a sacrificial cost, to reach out courageously, to take a relational risk, maybe to share Jesus with a friend, to wait expectantly on something that you truly believe God has told you he's going to do, to step out on the water, so to speak, and then join the laugh-filled faith adventure he's calling all of us to live. Do you know, we are here together this morning, right now, because of one of those laughs. A group of what were essentially young adults, almost fresh out of high school, who had zero church planning experience or church leadership, felt called to start a church that met in homes and then the public library, and then eventually broke ground at 1140 Gorham in an industrial area, a church that for almost 40 years has impacted thousands of lives, sent all kinds of ministry leaders, missionaries, pastors, church planners, marketplace leaders, baptized hundreds. If those, I'll call them kids, could have seen the impact almost 40 years ago, they would have just laughed in grateful disbelief. Or even a guy like me, who at one point in his young life, if you would have said, if you could list all the possible vocations in the world that I might pursue, at the very bottom, right below proctologist, right below elephant inseminator, pastor, and maybe God laughed at my audacity. You've heard the saying, you know how to make God laugh? Tell him your plans. Because he's like, oh, that's so adorable. They think they control the future. I think of all the couples in our church who, granted, weren't in Abraham and Sarah's stage of life, but who were just about to get their head around the idea of never having children of their own, the grief of that, or so they thought, and the joyful laugh that came when God met the desires of their heart. The check that came at exactly the right time for exactly the right amount, and all you can do is kind of look up to God and laugh and say, your timing is kind of scary, but kind of perfect. I think of the son or daughter who had been written off as a prodigal, maybe for life, and who one day says, with no prompting, no pressure, out of left field, Mom, Dad, I think I've come to the end of myself. I think I need something or someone bigger than myself. Can I come to church with you next week? And you just laugh because you've been trying all kinds of things to cajole and manipulate and guilt trip your kid into the kingdom of heaven. And God says, do you think you care more about my lost kids than I do? I haven't taken my eye off them for 1 second. While you were sleeping, I was at work wooing them back into the family of God. My timing is not your timing. I am not slow to act in the way the world defines slow. I have a plan and I have a purpose. And we say, Lord, do it again. Do it again, Lord. And you just laugh in gratitude and think, it's a lesson I have to keep relearning. Thank you, God. You've done it before. Now do it again. When my own mother faced what is possibly the scariest word ever conceived of in the English language, cancer, and we prayed and we prayed, and we happened to be in Ontario on a trip from out west where we could join her at the London Regional Cancer Clinic and get to go through that beautiful ritual that maybe you've seen where other survivors have gone through it. They walk into the lobby and they boldly ring this bell as a sign to everyone sitting there in that waiting room that she was cancer-free, and have a room full of strangers join in our whooping and hollering and celebration. And what those people in the room may not have known was that they were joining in the worship of a God who heals in 2024, even heals cancer. And some of you this morning, we are joining you in faith. And we say, Lord, we've seen you heal before. Now do it again, Lord. Do it again. And we look forward to that head-shaking laugh of disbelief, which is more like a laugh of faith building, when the doctor comes in and says to some of you in this room, sir, ma'am, I don't understand what I'm looking at here, but these tests seem to say you're totally healthy. Do it again, Lord. Do it again. When my girls were little, 3 little girls with a year between them, and sometimes we'd go to the park, and when they would go down the slide, I do my claw routine, which is a routine I stole from Newmarket's own Jim Carrey. I can't stop the claw. And they'd go down the slide and I tickle them all the way down. And did I mention not to do that to my wife, by the way, last week? Okay, good. And what do you think they would say when they get to the bottom? Do it again. Do it again, Daddy. If I did it 20 times, they'd want to do it 21 times. The old writer G.K. Chesterton, he wrote that God might be the most childlike in the universe, a quality that we seem to lose. So how did God create daisies? Did he just say, daisies be? Chesterton thinks that after he created the first little daisy, something childlike inside the very heart of God yelled, do it again. So God created a daisy number 2. And then something inside God said, do it again. And daisy number 3. And then daisy number 4. And then 50 billion trillion daisies later, the great God of the universe is still jumping up and down, clapping his hands, having a blast. Now listen to how Chesterton described it. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun. And every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessary that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. So learn to laugh with God, even in disbelief, but you anchor that disbelief with faith that calls you to trust and action. You'll laugh on the front end, but you will shake your head and laugh later when you recount the story of just how faithful, how audacious, how miraculous our God is. He's done it before. He'll do it again. Somebody say amen to that.